Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next episode of Wisdom of the Mystics. I'm Reverend Kathy Mastroianni, Executive Director of the Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation. And it truly is a joy and honor to be here with y'all as we really delve into the history of New Thought. We go even deeper into the wisdom of the mystics that are the foundation of our teaching and our lives and why we're here today. And this wisdom uplifts us, uplevels us, and brings us such joy. And so it's my honor to be here today with our beloved Laura Topper.
Oh, hello, Reverend Kathy. And yes, it's wonderful to be here. Welcome to everybody that is joining us live here on New Thought Media Network for our exciting broadcast today, where we are welcoming an incredible teacher and leader, New Thought leader and scholar, somebody that is here to really shine his light on the teachings from the perspective of knowing the mystics that really influenced life and his own teachings. So I'm really excited, Reverend Kathy, to be here with our super guest today. Would you like to introduce him?
It'd be my honor. So this is truly a scholar of Thomas Troward. He is a student of New Thought. And this is Dr. Tom Sannar. And when he was 17 years old, he had a mystical experience himself. He felt himself enfolded in an absolute, universal, and unconditional love. And he knew that regardless of what appeared in the relative world, that everything was unfolding in perfect right order. And he found this teaching of science of mind and spirit. And learning about Ernest Holmes, he found Thomas Troward. And he has written this comprehensive book on Thomas Troward. He's been a scholar of Troward since 1977. And without further ado, I'd like to bring on our show, Dr. Tom Sannar. There he is.
Hi, how's everybody? It's a pleasure to be with you.
Hello. Welcome to Wisdom of the Mystics, Dr. Sannar. It's just such an honor for us being here with you to learn and understand more of the mystic that you absolutely know a lot about, Thomas Troward. Thank you for sharing today.
Oh, you're welcome. And the first thing that comes into my mind is that nobody knows any more about spirit than anybody else. In fact, Ernest Holmes said nobody whispered anything into my ear that wasn't equally available to everybody. It's just that sometimes people don't listen, and so it's not that I have any special knowledge that isn't available to others. It's just that it's just what you put your attention on, and I happen to decide to put a lot of attention on reading all of the works of Troward, and then kind of synthesizing them so hopefully they could be understood by others, and see that they are the theoretical, that the works of Troward are the theoretical basis of the teaching of science of mind and spirit.
Thank you. And we would love to hear, who was Thomas Troward? What was he like as a person in the world?
Well, Troward was born actually in the Punjab region of India. His parents were in the Indian civil service. He spent his early years until he was about 6 years old in India. And then it was traditional at that time for British people to come back to England. And Troward came back with his mother to England, where he studied from the time he was 6 until the time he was 17 or 18 in Great Britain, and he had a classical British education. And then when he was 18 years old, he studied what was called, or 18 or 19, he studied what was called the Indian Civil Service examination. And that based on that examination, he received an appointment, soon getting to the position where he was an assistant commissioner, which is kind of like a superior court judge in America. He was a assistant commissioner in the Punjab region, and from the age 22 until 55 years old, he actually was a judge, and he had a lot of different people come into his courtroom, and during that period of time, he learned all of the dialects of the Indian people, and he had an inclination towards mysticism anyway, and so he incorporated those mystical ideas into very practical ideas of what he learned about in India. And of course, he decided, that a lot of people know, that there is only one truth, but there are many different ways of approaching it. And so Troward approached it, tried to show that there is only one spiritual truth. And then when he was 55, he then came back to England, and his intention at that time was simply to retire and paint. He was a painter, and he didn't have any idea that he was going to get involved in what was called at that time the higher thought movement. And the story is that he was in an English tea room when he was about 56 years old, and it was quite crowded in there. And there was a woman that was sitting next to him, and he was writing. He always wrote about things himself, and she glanced over at what he was writing, and she said to him, "Now these are." Who knows if this is actually true? These ideas came from a man named Harry Gazi, who studied Troward, and he said the woman said her name was Alice Callow, and she said to him, "Sir, I see that you are writing higher thought." And he said to her, "Madam, I don't know what you're talking about," because he wasn't familiar with that terminology. But at any rate, she recognized in him some kind of expertise and invited him to the Higher Thought Society. For the first year that he came, he kind of sat in the background, and then they realized, the people of the Higher Thought Society realized, that he knew more than any of them. And so they continued to ask him to speak. And then in 1904, they asked him if he would give a series of lectures in Edinburgh, Scotland. And that was the first set of lectures, called the Edinburgh Lectures, that he gave. Now, in those days, you didn't speak extemporaneously. You wrote down everything that you were going to say, and then you read what you wrote. Well, anybody who has read the Edinburgh Lectures knows that it's kind of obtuse language, and it's kind of difficult to understand. So because most of the people couldn't understand what he was really talking about, they asked him to produce it in a book format. And so he did, and he created quite a following. And this was in 1904, 1905. In 1912, there was a 5'3.5", 5'4" sort of pudgy young man, about 28 years old, in Venice, California. And his name was Ernest Holmes. And he picked up this Edinburgh Lectures that was in written form, and he started reading it. And he had prepared himself for these kinds of things. And so he knew what Troward was talking about. And he realized that Troward had provided him with the theoretical framework for science of mind. And so in 1912, Holmes read this material. And then it was a couple of years later, by 1914, that Holmes started giving his first lectures on the Edinburgh Lectures and other works of Troward. There was another set of called the Doré Lectures. So Holmes gave lectures on that, and people realized how profound Thomas Troward really was. So Troward set out an entire series of what it is like for intelligence and consciousness to move from what was called the simple consciousness. He said the entire universe was alive, and there were gradations of consciousness from simple consciousness to complex consciousness, and it went through the plants to the animals to humans. And then Troward said that there was another level called the divine kingdom, and that we were evolving in this area from these different levels of consciousness. And so Troward laid out an entire methodology in which we could live as mystical spiritual beings from this divine consciousness. And he laid out the entire process for us, and it's all there in the 7 books that Troward wrote. He believed, Troward, the interesting thing is Troward did believe that he believed in personal immortality, and he did believe that if we learned enough, we wouldn't have to die. Unfortunately, Troward didn't totally embody all that, because when he was 69 years old, which was, still fair, not really old, that old at the time. People were living longer than that. He passed from this scene, and and that was 1915. So I mean that gives you a little background of the life of Troward. He was married twice. He had 4 daughters, 2 by his first marriage and 2 by his second marriage. He was said to be kind of a trickster. He loved to play practical jokes. He had a wonderful sense of humor. There are different stories about one time he came and he got to the wrong house. He thought he was in his house and he was in the neighbor's house, and he thought he would play a trick on his kids, and so he was down on his hands and knees acting like an animal, and a woman whose house it actually was came in the living room and saw this man that she didn't recognize bellowing like an elephant. Scared the heck out of her. Things like that. And then he played tricks with his children, and so people liked him. I mean, he had a twinkle in his eye all the time. I don't think he ever took himself too seriously, even though what he wrote was very serious. So that's kind of, I mean, he was an Englishman. He was a proper Englishman, but at the same time, he was sort of a comedic proper Englishman. So.
And he had such an interesting growing up, to be in England and to be in India and to have that understanding of different cultures and different ideas of theology and religion. And I'm wondering if he had a direct mystical experience himself. if of any sort? Do you know if he did, if that
He
sparked
did.
him initially?
He did, but he didn't really talk about those things because his most of the things that he wrote about were left brain. They were analysis. So I mean, if, for example, if you compare Troward to Emerson, Emerson was about feeling, was about was about experiencing the divine, where Troward was more about analyzing it. So Troward, if you look at Troward's work, he doesn't spend time talking about the experience himself, but what the experience meant. He was much more interesting in a step-by-step process by which we could live our lives as spiritual beings. So in that sense, in that sense, Troward would not be considered a, quote, mystic, although most of those kinds of experiences he kept private to himself. One thing he did do that, and Ernest Holmes talked about this a lot, the difference between mysticism and psychism. Troward was very interested in psychic phenomena, and there were experiences that he talked about where he was in two different places at one time. People actually saw him in Scotland when he was in England, and they actually conversed with him in Scotland. And so he commented on those kinds of ideas where he apparently transcended time and space. And he talked about a lot. One of the real interesting ones where Troward was with I believe it was his first wife, and they were in India at the time, and they had been on vacation and were staying at a like a hostel or some kind of vacation home. But anyway, the Troward's wife was in this other room, and all of a sudden he heard a shriek, and it was like she screamed, and he ran into the other room, and he said, "What happened?" And his wife said that there was a man who stood over her bed with a gun, and just scared the heck out of her. And the next morning, they actually talked to the wife, and Troward's wife described the man she saw, and the woman said, "Oh yeah, that was my late husband. He committed suicide in this room." And she absolutely described him. So things like that. So Troward was interested in those kinds of things, that we have the ability to look at different dimensions and different time sequences about various things. And Holmes made that distinction between the mystical and the psychic. In the psychic, those things are recorded in what's called universal subconscious mind. The mystic transcends the subconscious mind and actually talks about unity and oneness.
Wow, thank you for sharing those stories. Oh my gosh, and I love that distinction of what Troward would look into the more psychic realm, in addition to the mystical realm. And I have, from the Science of Mind Archives website, we have a little article about Ernest Holmes, and Ernest says, "The thing I like about Troward is that he gives a scientific or logical explanation of whatever he claims. Take the idea of unity, for example. He quotes from the ancient teachers of India, the Vedantas, if I'm saying that right, saying that it's impossible to have two infinities, for if there were two, neither of them could be infinite. Therefore, there is only one." Right. And so just that oneness. And I love how Ernest really, drank from Troward and just really utilized that in his teaching.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things is when you get a perspective from a farther distance, you have the opportunity, for example, to compare and contrast Troward to an Indian mystic, Sri Aurobindo, who also influenced Dr. Holmes. And the interesting thing about it is their lives paralleled. They were on the planet at the same time. But and Aurobindo was from a very wealthy family in India. So when Aurobindo was 5 years old in India, he also went to England, and he also took a classical English education. Didn't have anything to do with spirituality, it was just the classical education. When Aurobindo was 18 or 19 years old, he came back to India, and he became actually a revolutionary. At first, he was a revolutionary because remember, in India at that time, around 1902 to 1905 or so, they wanted to get rid of the English, and there were Indian revolutionaries. And actually, Aurobindo was tried. He was tried as a terrorist. He was acquitted. But you can see the whole life of Aurobindo, compare it to the life of Troward. One was an Indian, one was an Englishman, and they came up with the same conclusions. That's the interesting thing. They came up with the same spiritual conclusions, even though they had totally different lives, which verified what Holmes was saying. Holmes says there's only one truth, and so it would stand to reason that people who experience this truth would come up with the same conclusions.
We kind of see that with Emerson and Quimby as well, living geographically in the same place around the same time, discovering and unfolding their ideas of truth at the same time. It's incredible how when we delve into what was happening and how people were, well, that must have been something that also psychic there, because there was tuning into that objective and into race consciousness of what
Right.
was wanting to come through as well.
Right.
And I'm wondering what you would say, what you would state that Thomas Troward's main teaching is.
Well, I did a class a few years ago, because probably 15, 20 years ago, at a Silmar, and I was asked to break down the entire teaching of Thomas Troward and present it in like an hour and a half or 2 hours. And so what I did is I came up with 18 different points that I presented, and I have been using those 18 different points to point out the variations in Troward, because he has so rich in the material. I'll just give you an example. For example, he came up with the idea of the reciprocal relationship between the universal and the individual, which is a very important idea that conjures up the idea of prayer and worship, and the idea of spiritual mind treatment, the idea of how love works with law. So that was part of this reciprocal relationship. He had an idea of where we're going when he wrote about the coming of the divine kingdom, and explained that we're moving to the next dimension of who we are as spiritual beings. And that's why Science of Mind is a very practical teaching, because Troward laid out methodology whereby if we followed this methodology, we could open ourselves up to this spiritual basis that would push us and move us to the next dimension of who we are, and that our purpose is not a merging into cosmic oneness, but our purpose in Science of Mind and in higher thought is to live our lives here on planet Earth, but to live as spiritual beings and bringing in this bringing in this divine kingdom so that we're actually living in a divine kingdom on planet Earth. That's the goal at this point. Now, after that period, there are other periods. And Troward, for example, talked about the doctrine of the octave, how things produce. He talked about how involution and evolution work, so that God involves itself into creation, and so creation can evolve back into God. Many of those things. So those were a few of those things, but there were like 18 different points, and I've got them written down. So if you want to talk about any one particular point, I'll just mention a couple that's really important. One is called the personal factor, and that's where Troward talks about people coming into the realization that they are actually contributing towards their own life by their thinking. In other words, that we begin to realize that what we're thinking about actually affects what is happening in our life, and that we can consciously begin to do it with the personal factor. He talked about principle and precedent, and his famous statement there is, principle is not bound by precedent. In other words, principle is coming from the absolute knowingness of spirit, where precedent is things that have happened before. So we can live our life based on what's happened before, or we can kind of open ourselves to the unlimited realization of spirit. He talked about
just real quick,
yeah.
Dr. Tom, I love both of those that you just said, the personal factor and that principle is not bound by precedent. Right. I mean, to me, that's how we co-create with spirit. And you also said we're living as spiritual beings now. And so I think that's what gives people hope when they, like in their family life, like all the women had cancer, so I'm going to get cancer, so we can stop that and say, wow, that's precedent. But in this moment, we use our personal factor. In this moment, I choose to know that I am healthy and happy and move forward, and that we can absolutely influence our lives, which is so pivotal in science of mind and spirit teachings. And so I think those are two really important. I mean, I think they give people hope, and It's beyond hope when you learn these principles, you use them, we co-create with our personal factor of, we get to choose our lives. We get to choose how we want to express and show up and influence the world.
Yeah, I mean, there's a simple statement that says, when your hair is messed up, you don't try to comb the mirror,
I like that.
which really tells you that, see, what most people do is they react to what has already happened in the world, and they will then create their life on the basis of their reactions. And so we try to seek meaning out of what's going on, but we're always looking at what has already happened instead of looking at what the possibilities are. And that's what Troward tried to direct us to, is those spiritual possibilities, and to take our attention away from what has already happened. The question is not what has happened. The question is, how do we creatively and lovingly respond to what is going on, and to always come from that place that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and that we're continually asking ourselves, what is the highest, kindest, most compassionate way we can live. And of course, it's not that easy to do all the time, because we're bombarded by all of these things that are occurring in time and space. But those are all secondary things compared to the primary idea.
And I'd like to, I'm acknowledging that people are watching here, and we have people interacting, and yes, we're going to get to some of these comments and questions, and welcome everybody here onto this Wisdom of the Mystics program here with Dr. Tom Sannar. This is such an interesting conversation. emerging about Thomas Troward. Now, I have one thing I really would love to ask you. I remember in class, you talked a lot about, well, not a lot, but you did talk about the idea that this teaching is mystical teaching and a mystical unfoldment, and we're folding. And as we lean into teaching, new thought, science of mind, the teachings of Troward, from the idea of mysticism, not only manifesting, you know, what we desire to manifest in the physical, when we kind of move through that and past that and come to that place where this is about our divinity, and I believe that many people who discover new thoughts, in a way, want to change their lives, of course, because they desire a change in their circumstance. And could you maybe talk on that for a little bit, and on how to actually get to that place of knowing the mystical,
sure,
and having that empower our lives?
Part of it has to do with the way the textbook of Science of Mind was written, so that when you pick up the Science of Mind textbook and when you teach at the beginning, you're teaching the metaphysical part. But actually, Science of Mind is in two parts. It's the mystical and the metaphysical. So when you look at spiritual mind treatment, the first thing you want communion with this universal spirit. To have communion with universal spirit, you have to have a mystical inclination where your purpose there is unity and oneness with spirit, so that when you speak your word, you're coming from spirit. You're not speaking your word from an individual personality. So the first part of our teaching is communion and mysticism. And then once we have that oneness, then you move to the metaphysical part, which is the creative process, which is speaking our word into the law of mind. So you have both sides. And unfortunately, what's happened in Science of Mind is that people pick up the metaphysical first, and they learn all about treatment, and they learn about the creative process. And for some reason, they don't emphasize the mystical. And then, of course, there are various reasons for this, but there are some of our teachers that really emphasize the impersonal part of the law, and they don't get into what Troward called infinite personalness, and Holmes called it the same thing, the infinite personalness of the mystic. And so they're looking at it only from the metaphysical part. And so what happens is we are creating from our own personality desires rather than creating from our spiritual base. In other words, you have to go through the mystical first in order to speak your word into the metaphysical. So they both have to be there.
Such a powerful and important point for all of our folks who are here. So yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. You know, and so we do have a couple questions here. This could be good. So I think you might know Michael Mangus.
Yeah.
He has a question, if you can see it.
I can see that.
Oh, Pastor Michael.
I know it's Pastor Michael.
He says, was author Genevieve Breland his only personal student, as she claimed? The answer is no. Depending on what her definition of personal student was, she wrote a book. The thing about Harry Gazi, we have two people that really comment on Troward. One was Harry Gazi, and the other is Genevieve Breland. And when you read them, I mean, they both give interesting information, but they both get caught up in their own personalities. Gazi was interesting because he actually was a teacher, and that he actually influenced Troward more than Genevieve was a student of Troward, but she was not the only student. But both of their books are worth reading. So I have to tell you, I have to every time I go back to her, I have to go back and start rereading her material because for some reasons a lot of her stuff doesn't stick with me that much.
So what was the other author's name, please?
Harry Gazi, Gaze, Gaze, yeah. And he was really important. A lot of people don't know this, but Harry Gazi was in the United States, and somewhere around 1898 or somewhere around there. And he went to a seminar in the United States where a man named Hudson Thompson or Thompson Hudson, I get him mixed up. Anyway, he was speaking, and he wrote a book called something with the subconscious mind. And at any rate, Gazi took Hudson Thompson's book and gave it to Troward. And without going into a lot of detail, Troward used part of that book for his writings of the Edinburgh Lectures. And the basic issue involved whether or not universal mind was impersonal only, but was both personal and impersonal. Anyway, it's worth reading, and definitely Troward was influenced by both Gazi and Hudson Thompson, or Thompson Hudson, whoever he was. I wish they would just have first names and second names, but there are I can't remember one or the other. But anyway, so Troward was influenced by Gazi to some extent, and then Gazi said he was a personal friend of Troward also, which he was.
All righty, thank you.
I see Ray McLeod writes, was Troward a Mason? I don't think he was deeply involved as a Mason, but he certainly understood the Masonic teaching. He was much closer. Troward was much closer to a Rosicrucian than a Mason. And if you look at Troward's works, he talks about much more about the Rosicrucians and what Troward calls the artist Elias, a very interesting term. And Troward seems to endorse the idea of this artist Elias, who would move us to the next dimension of who we are, and he got that from the Rosicrucian movement. And you have to remember, I'm talking off the top of my head. Yeah, it Alias, Elias, yeah. And I'm talking off the top of my head because I haven't looked at the material. So, yeah. So I don't think he was a Mason, but he knew about the Masons, of course.
Thank you.
Sure.
I was going to ask you that question because it feels as if Thomas Troward's work is so intense, so deep, and so mystical. And I was just wondering how was he inspired to understand in such depth such a body of work, and to be able
first of all,
to bring this forward?
Well, there is an inclination. Troward was an attorney too. You know, he was a judge, and he had a legal mind. And so anybody who really gets deep into the idea of an attorney, what they want to do is they want to figure out the lay of the land. They want to figure out what comes first, what comes second, and they want to create this step-by-step approach and anybody who goes into it with any depth, what they want to find out is how the law works from the beginning. It's not just analyzing statutes. It's going to the basic of it. Where do they come from? How does the law evolve from the beginning through the process? And so Troward knew how to do that. And when you're trained that way, you're trained to look for the methods by which the universe is explained. And so in some sense, it's like a physicist, and that's why one of the interesting and intriguing things is that we're called science of mind for a reason, and that is because Holmes believed that what we believe spiritually is compatible with science, and so that you can look to science and that you should have a compatibility between our spirituality and science. And if there isn't a compatibility, you have to take a hard look and say, where is it? So what is unique about our teaching? We could be just any kind of faith. We could just say we believe this because we believe it on the basis of faith. But science of mind goes one step further. They say we believe this because it is consistent with the way the universe works, not just spiritually, but scientifically. And that's why it's very interesting when you get into quantum physics, which Holmes really was not involved with very much because it came later. But that's where the challenge is that our teaching is consistent with some of the latest findings in quantum physics. You know, the idea that Troward talked about, the idea that there's just this spiritual energy that is a potential of all possibility, but this spiritual energy becomes something when it is observed, just as a wave becomes a particle when it is observed. So it's very similar.
Yes, I've written that down. I've written quantum physics down here, and was just intrigued as to how Thomas Troward was aligned, and he knew, and I wonder what he would have, if he were here now, what he would be saying about quantum physics.
Well, I'm sure he would have written a book, and he would have compared quantum physics to his findings of spiritual science, and he would have shown how they're compatible. Remember, he died in 1916, so that was before any of this material became public. And that's why Troward, for example, at Holmes, to a certain extent, used the word ether. We try not to use that word anymore because it's basically been discredited in science. It was the idea that light had a medium called ether, and that light moved within this medium. Well, they showed, and especially Einstein showed, that there is no medium, that light moves at one particular, the speed of light is constant. Just one little thing there.
But that's the cool thing about the science of mind and all this theories and philosophies. And I just think that there's it's not ironic, but like how Thomas Troward talked about the impersonal law of the universe is creative. And so for a lawyer and a judge to talk about the law, so as we talk about the law that is impersonal, that, we speak our word into the law that brings it back fulfilled, or always listens to our word. I just think that I understand it's one of the powerful influences on Ernest Holmes was hello, I can't talk right now, it's gone, is this concept.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why when we talk about faith, for example, in Science of Mind, well, it's one of the more difficult concepts to teach, because there's faith in derogation of reason, and then there's faith that transcends reason. And people it's hard to understand that. But a Pentecostal person could have faith, and they could, for example, I don't know if this is necessarily Pentecostal, but there are some teachings that says that the earth is only 8,000 years old. And but we can scientifically show that the earth is much, much older than that. And we can prove it through fossil records, just as we can prove the theory of the Big Bang is not just a theory. I mean, we can show, because of a lot of evidence, that there was such a thing. So our teaching has to be consistent with science that is proven. And so we can't just say, well, I believe the earth is 8,000 years old because that's my faith and that's how I interpret the Bible. Well, if we taught that, it would make us no different than any other particular religion. But we say we only use faith where it transcends reason, where reason cannot answer the question. It's the same thing with, does God exist or does God not exist? Well, if you look at it very clearly and you look at all of the arguments, you come up with the conclusion that we cannot show through reason whether God exists or not. You can't show it through reason because reason is indigenous in the whole process. So you're left with this question. And I followed it through with a lot of people who are non-believers, and they don't want to take the leap of faith. In other words, they can be shown that in order to really believe in God, be a personal presence in their life, they have to take the leap of faith. In other words, it's a leap into the unknown. Reason cannot support it, but it's a question of is it there? And that's what St. Anselm said when he said, I believe that I may know. Well, what did he mean? He meant that once you take the leap of faith, then a whole new vista of spirituality opens up to you. And if you're not willing to take that, then you're left with your own existential way of looking at the world, rather than having a power and a presence of spirit that oversees the whole process. And a lot of people don't want to do that. Because they don't know. But the thing is, once you take the leap, and of course, mystical experience will help you to do that, because you can't know spirit unless you can't know it at depth unless you've had some kind of experience of it, or just a deep leap of faith. And that's really what it boils down to. And I've talked to a lot of people about that, and some people are unwilling to do it because they can't prove it. You cannot prove it with rationality.
I was just going to add that on and to ask you, because I know we have about 11 minutes left. This is so interesting. I was just wanting to ask you then, that's the point where maybe science and spirituality well, there's an opportunity for that deeper kind of union of the two, because that's the point where we're asked to go beyond logic and beyond reason and take that leap of faith, where we can't see that this has been scientifically proven. We're
right.
Actually we're delving into the mystical here.
That's right.
And that's the part that many people are, unwilling to or not ready to.
And that was the whole thing about, and that was the whole thing about Emma Curtis Hopkins' teaching. Her teaching was, you will see what you believe. In other words, you have to believe it in order to see it. So that if you don't see the presence of a loving, creative God, if you don't see it in your own mind, you're not gonna believe it, because it doesn't become real to you. But if you're willing to take that leap of faith, then all of a sudden it pours, and you actually have that experience. Ernest Holmes could not have had mystical experiences unless he believed that they were possible. And so it's like self-fulfilling process. A person who is a materialist says, well, it has to be materialism because that's what we see. But the idealist says, go beyond that, take that leap. And the materialist says, I'm not taking that leap because I can't see it. Because see, what are they looking at? They're looking at precedent. They're looking at what's already happened. And we're saying you got to take the leap to begin to experience that.
Yeah, if you want a miracle in your life, if you want to have something happen that you've never experienced before, you need to take that leap of faith.
Yeah.
And to know that it can be possible. You don't have to know how, you just have to know that it's possible for something greater. And like you're saying, it's going to a whole nother level of consciousness and experience in life. And I think that, and I know we've talked actually quite a lot about how this teaching is practical, but so what advice would you give to our viewers of how this teaching is practical and applicable for people today?
Well, one of the things I would say is that you have to develop what's called the observer self. And what that means is you have to be able to step outside of yourself and watch your behavior in a non-judgmental way. You have to be willing to have the courage to say, in my actions as a human being, am I violating some basic ideas of like empathy, of kindness, of compassion, my emotions? Do my negative emotions begin to control me? So you have to be really honest with yourself, and you have to list those things that are compatible with what it means to be a spiritual being. And then you have to say, am I living my life that way? And you can do that. It's not that easy to do it. And it's nice. It's much nicer to be able to do it if you have a partner or somebody who is doing it with you, because they'll call you on it. They'll say, you're out of principle. So it's not that easy to do, but you say, how does a spiritual being behave? And then you start behaving that way. And it's really that simple. And then you realize that you don't compartmentalize, because we believe in unity and oneness. So you don't compartmentalize and say, I'm going to act this way in this situation and another way in another situation. We want to act as spiritual beings all the time. So compassion, kindness, gratitude, forgiveness, empathy, all of those things that really make for the real spiritual being. We want to develop and embody those ideas and live from those ideas. So it's not theoretical, it's very practical.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Tom, for being here and for sharing with us today, and for everybody that's watching, viewing, and the questions and comments that have come in. We really, really value you for being here, and I'm sure that you've gleaned from this amazing conversation with Dr. Tom Sannar on Thomas Troward. And Dr. Sannar, I have your book up here, The Complete Works of Thomas Troward. This is your writing, yes, years of researching and understanding Thomas Troward. Where can people find your book?
Oh,
your
well, the
books?
best way to find it is just send me an email and then
There we
I'll
go.
get it to you. I think we're selling it for $20 right now.
Fantastic. And do you have more classes coming up where you're teaching this that people can join in
Yes,
with?
yes. I'm working with Seaside Spiritual Center, and we're teaching a class called Roots of Science of Mind, which is Troward is one of the roots. So we talk about all of the different foundations of the teaching, where it came from, and that's going to be starting next Wednesday night. No, I'm sorry, next Tuesday night at Seaside with the Zoom also, and then on Wednesday nights I'm starting a class with Emma Curtis Hopkins and Thomas Troward, comparing and contrasting the two. And every Wednesday night I have a class,
Oh, that
so
will be amazing.
anyone can join those.
And I've
Fantastic.
benefited
And
from, I think we have a little delay. Yeah, I was able to go to Dr. Tom's extension study course to the Science of Mind textbook that Ernest created. And I can't even tell you, I mean, how much you really, by taking classes with Dr. Tom, you can really deepen into the teaching. And it's a community. You connect with these beautiful souls, and we're all learning together. And Dr. Tom is just masterful at just creating a loving, supportive, safe environment to learn and grow. And it's so much more than just, the line by line like teachings. It's how can we use it in our lives? And so I'm very grateful for you, Dr. Tom.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Yes, I know Pastor Mike is a part of your group as well, and he might be popping on here after the show to say hi to you. So,
Okay.
so I just want to say thank you from my heart. But question, just because we have about 2 minutes left, if you could recommend one book, one Thomas Troward book or reading for somebody that has not read any of Thomas Troward's work before, or is interested and wants to read another book, what would you recommend?
Well, first I'd recommend an essay called Threefold Man. It's a very short essay. It's only about 2 pages long, and it is kind of like the whole thing in a nutshell. It's called Threefold Man. And the second one, I think the second one is kind of a fascinating, is The Law and the Word by Troward. To go through that book, and then that will open you up to a lot of other questions too.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Dr. Tom has just been such an amazing supporter of the Science of Mind archives, and providing us different resources and tools. And, the archives, our website, scienceofmindarchives.com, is just a wealth of information as well to help people deepen into these wonderful mystics that change our lives. And so we're encourage you to check that out too. And I bet Laura has something to say about New Thought Media Network.
Oh, yeah. Check out Science of Mind archives. Absolutely. There is so much there. It's incredible. I'm always on that website delving into the content. And of course, yes, we are here with New Thought Media Network, which is a CSL, Center for Spiritual Living, focus ministry, online sharing teachings every single day of the year in different ways. And you are welcome and invited to understand even more deeply for yourself the reciprocal process and to donate into our, there we go, the donation link there at ntmedia.org. And if this feeds you, then know that you can be involved by gifting of your treasure into the network, because we're doing so many amazing things and we have a big vision unfolding. And thank you, Dr. Tom Sannar, for being here and being so generous with some of the mystics.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone who is here. Have a wonderful, blessed day, and we will see you next time here at Wisdom of the Mystics. Yeah.
We will.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.